So I want to do a video real quick. I want to do a review of Orville, the Seth Macfarlane live-action science fiction spoofy thing that just came on Sunday. It's Monday. I just watched it on Fox, Fox.com or whatever. And I wanted to do a review of it because I thought it was very interesting. But not very funny, but very interesting. So I'd been curious about it for a while because over the last few months, there had been more kind of noise about this show than the actual Star Trek that's coming up, I think, in a few weeks. And because this seems to, the idea being that this spoof show, from the visuals and the commercials we've seen so far, seems to capture the spirit of Star Trek more than the actual Star Trek show that's coming up. And I think this is actually literally going to be the case. Like, the spoof is going to be more Star Trek than the Star Trek show. And I should explain that a little. As a comedy, the show fails. I watched it. I really wasn't... I didn't laugh at anything. The jokes are okay. They come in a little slow, and the pacing is not great. I mean, I don't want to start pooing on this show, because while it fails as a comedy, as a Star Trek, it's actually pretty damn good. I mean, it's not fabulous, but it's pretty excellent. So, the thing is, if you make Star Trek, and they are, this is a thing, and I've actually did a video talking about this show already, the Star Trek coming up, Star Trek whatever the hell, I couldn't be bothered to pay attention, it's really late at night, I'm tired. So screw you. The problem with doing Star Trek now is that Star Trek is based on kind of a goofy premise. It's for God's sake, it's a show from the 60s. Every time they do Star Trek, they have to reinvent it, and they're not wrong to do so. They have to reinvent it. Star Trek Voyager was the same. It was the most like classic Star Trek. And it was very boring. I really hated that show. I mean, it's the same traveling through... It's an idea that's brilliantly innovative in the 60s. Is not really the show to win in the aughts. It just isn't. So every time they do Star Trek, they have to kind of reinvent the show a little bit. So where do you go now? With the J.J. Abrams movies, you go grittier, you go a bit darker, you go more serious. And honestly, as much as I love Deep Space Nine, I'd say that that's not the worst way to go. The problem is it's not really, I think, where fans want to go. I mean, the last J.J. Abrams movie was very good. It was a very good Star Trek, and it bombed. It bombed horribly. I was very disappointed to hear that. Which means they're not going to go that route anymore, which is a shame. It is the most like Trek and the most, but at the same time the most different, if that makes any sense. Here's my thinking, is that because Orville isn't actually Star Trek, it doesn't have any need to prove itself to the standards of the regular show. It's not Star Trek. It's its own thing. So it can create its own aesthetic. It is free to do whatever it wants. It can make as much stuff similar to Star Trek as it wants because it's a spoof. It is flat out calls itself a parody. So if it's a parody, it can make itself very, very similar. But at the same time, it can kind of pick and choose what it wants to keep and what it wants to throw away. Brilliant, actually. I was thinking about this on the way home. After I watched it, I got Taco Bell. On the way home, I'm thinking, did Seth Macfarlane deliberately... Because I know for a fact, I'd seen in interviews that he was a really big fan of Star Trek, wanted to do Star Trek. Not a spoof of Star Trek, actual Star Trek. Did he actually trick them into kind of sort of giving him a Star Trek? I don't know. I mean, looking at it, I think maybe. I think it's a distinct possibility, because it's not terrible. Like, the jokes that don't really land, which is most of them, are okay. Like, they're not cringe-worthy. They're not like cringy, like ugh, that was terrible. But they're just not very funny. They're a little amusing, but it's like kind of C-grade comedy. I mean, it's not bad, but it's not great. It certainly doesn't lead the show. Like, I would not watch this show again on the strength of its humorous writing. As far as the rest of it goes, they have an interesting enough... I mean, the acting is on par with a pilot or a first episode. You know, the actors don't really know where the characters are yet. Seth Macfarlane seems to be the most on key, but then he's like the creator, so he knows exactly what each character should be like, and so he has kind of an advantage there. But because it's a comedy, they don't have to make it grittier. They don't have to make it darker. They don't have to reimagine it as a brand new series because it's a comedy, it's a spoof. So they can really do whatever they want, which is freaking brilliant. So the show itself mostly comes off as like a more modern Star Trek Next Generation. In fact, there's a lot of the tropes from the Next Gen now that I think about it. Virtually none of the tropes from Deep Space Nine or anything like that. Okay, so there you go. It's essentially Next Generation with slightly more dynamic characters. I know Gene Roddenberry was kind of a weight on the Next Gen set. Like, he'd say, oh, they can't have interpersonal conflicts. Like goofy crap like that, which, you know, conflict is the meat and bread. It's the sustenance. It's the air for any good drama of any sort. Can't have, with no conflict, you're just watching, well, you're watching boring people fly around and run into stuff. You know, basically dealing with natural disasters and bad guys. Perfect people are not that fun to watch. This show did a very good job of making everyone flawed in some interesting enough way. Well, it's the first episode, and I know there's a whole season. Honestly, having seen it, I hope there's a second season. Like, I know I flat out said, this fails as a comedy, and it really does. It's not very funny at all, but it's pretty good. It's like, there hasn't been a Star Trek on the air in a while, and there is a Star Trek shaped hole in our hearts, and this would fill it. It fills it very well. It is, I mean, as far as capturing the spirit of Trek, it's almost spot on. I mean, it's beautiful, and it's very dry, which once again makes me think, like, did Seth Macfarlane just get away with tricking people into getting to make him a Star Trek? I don't know, but if he is, he did a good job, because that's brilliant. He did it. So here's the question: am I going to do this, like, review this the same way I review movies? And that Taco Bell's kind of kicking in. I'm getting sleepy, so I'm going to finish up and do that. How do I do this shit? I have to think about it every time. It's, what are the odds you'll see it and not like it? For this show, I think you got good odds. I think there's 1 in 3 chance you'll see it and not like it. At best. Because if you're expecting it to be Family Guy, American Dad, you're going to be disappointed. The flip side, if you're hoping for something interesting, you've got it. This is actually pretty interesting. If you're a Star Trek fan, I think there's enough in this that will appeal to you. Because there's none of that, this doesn't match continuity. It's not Star Trek. It doesn't have to. There are no transporters on this show. Like, at one point it blew my mind. They had to race to the shuttle, and it's like, holy shit, they don't have transporters. They really don't have transporters. Like, holy crap. That's actually pretty cool. A lot of I've often said Star Trek needs a hard reboot. Like, it probably needs it at this point. And making an entirely new series that's only nominally Star Trek at all, I mean, it's not Star Trek, but it really kind of is a genius, like, way around that. problem. So I think if you went into this for the comedy, you're going to be disappointed. It's not that funny. If you went into this for the Star Trek, you'll be pleasantly surprised. In fact, if you're a fan of Star Trek, I strongly recommend this. Strongly recommend this. Let me say that. Check it out. Do I want to see this again? I think it's rewatchable. Like I said, it would be more watchable if it were funnier or had more surprises. As it is, it was a pretty good episode of Next Generation. with characters who are more interesting out of the box. Like, don't get me wrong, Captain Picard rules the world and the universe, but episode 1, he's kind of the stuffy British guy, who's the captain, the stuffy British bald captain. What was it, Farpoint or whatever? So this has, like you've seen from the preview, his ex-wife is like the second in command, immediate conflict, lots of good stuff. Conflict is what drives any story, and this has enough of it that it's worth watching. It kept my interest the entire episode. At no point did I divert from it and go, I'll pause this and watch something else later. Which is, considering I have the attention span of a meth-addicted hamster at this point, that's a pretty high praise, I think. So, I recommend checking it out. Check out Seth MacFarlane's Orville. It's decently good, especially if you like Star Trek.